She called her mother on the evening of January 8, 1982, made plans for the next morning, said goodnight, hung up, and was never seen again. Her name was Lynette Dawson. She was 33 years old, a nurse, a mother of 2 young girls living in a quiet suburb on Sydney's northern beaches. She had places to be the next day. She had family expecting her. She had a life, a full, real, grounded life that gave absolutely no sign it was about to end. But it did. And the man who knew exactly what happened said nothing. Instead, he said she left, that she needed space, that the marriage had been difficult and she had made a decision. He said it calmly. He said it clearly. He said it to police, to family, to anyone who asked. The story sounded reasonable. That was the point, because this is not a story about a crime of passion or a moment of uncontrolled rage. This is something colder than that. This is the story of a man who made a calculated decision about another human being's life, then spent 40 years managing the story around it, who used silence, control, and the slow erosion of other people's certainty as a strategy, who watched Lynette's family grieve and question and search, and maintained his version without breaking. For 4 decades, it worked. Then it didn't. And the way it unraveled tells you everything about what it had been hiding. This is the case of Chris Dawson. And if you think you know how a story like this ends, stay with me, because the detail of how this one played out is more psychologically revealing than most. Let's go back. Chris and Lynette Dawson married in 1970. He was a professional rugby league player, athletic, confident, the kind of person a room notices when they walk in. She was warm and practical, a trained nurse, deeply rooted in family. They settled in Bayview on Sydney's northern beaches, had 2 daughters, built a life. From the outside, it looked like a solid foundation. But that's the thing about foundations. The cracks don't announce themselves. Chris transitioned from professional sport into teaching, working as a PE teacher at Cromer High School. There were financial tensions, small arguments about money spending, the kind of friction most couples know. Nothing that would have predicted what came next. What changed everything wasn't the money. It was a girl. She was a student at Cromer High, mid-teens. In one of Chris Dawson's classes, she would later be known publicly only by her initials, JC, to protect her identity. He paid her a particular kind of attention, the kind that a teenager in a vulnerable position doesn't always recognize for what it is, the kind that an adult in a position of authority should never direct at a student. By 1981, the relationship had become sexual. She was approximately 16. He was a married man in his 30s with 2 young children at home, but here's where it gets darker. He didn't keep the 2 worlds separate. He brought her into the house. He positioned her as a babysitter, gave her a reason to be there, gave Lynette a reason to accept her presence without suspicion. Lynette trusted him. She had no reason not to. That trust was the crack, not loud, not visible from the street. But underneath the surface of that household, the structure had already been compromised. Chris Dawson was maintaining a double life, and he was doing it with the deliberate precision of someone who had thought it through. And then, according to JC's later testimony, the thinking went further. She testified that Dawson had discussed removing Lynette from the equation, not separating, not divorcing, removing. She described a car trip in which he had allegedly attempted to arrange for someone to be paid to kill his wife. She described what he said when that arrangement fell through, that he would handle it himself. Those are not the words of a man looking for a way out of a marriage. Those are the words of a man who had already decided that Lynette's existence was a problem with only one solution. Lynette knew none of this. She went to work. She raised her daughters. She made plans to see her mother on a Sunday morning. Then something changed. January 8, 1982, evening, a phone call with her mother. Ordinary, warm. Plans confirmed for the next morning. That was the last verified contact anyone had with Lynette Dawson. She didn't make it to the morning. When family gathered and she wasn't there, they looked for answers. The only person who had answers was her husband. He said she called him on January 9th, said she needed time away from the marriage, said she was leaving to figure things out, said it was a difficult call but a clear one. No one else heard this call. No record confirmed it. No friend received a message from Lynette. No family member heard her voice. No bank account was touched. No government document was generated. No hospital, no employer, no government system of any kind registered Lynette Dawson's existence at any point after the night of January 8th. She did not access money. She did not contact her children. She did not resurface anywhere. But that wasn't the end. Because before Lynette's family had even begun to fully process the shock of her absence, something was already happening in the Bayview house. Within days of Lynette's disappearance, JC moved in. Not weeks later, days. She moved into the home, into the domestic role, into the space that Lynette had occupied. She was still a teenager. She was now, for all visible purposes, the woman of the house. And Chris Dawson did not report his wife missing for approximately 6 weeks. Let that sit for a moment. His wife had, by his own account, suddenly abandoned their marriage and their children without warning. And his response to that was to wait 6 weeks before telling anyone in an official capacity that she was gone, while simultaneously installing the girl he had been secretly involved with into the home she had just vacated. That's not grief. That's management. When questions eventually came, he had answers ready. She had joined a religious group. She had gone to New Zealand. She had been struggling with credit card debt and needed to disappear for a while. Each version emerged when the previous one started to feel thin. None were verifiable. None came with a single piece of supporting evidence. And here's where the story breaks. Every version of Lynette's supposed voluntary exit required her to have made a choice, a conscious decision, to abandon 2 young girls without looking back, without a call, without a letter, without showing up once in the years that followed to check that her daughters were okay. Her family knew that was impossible, not because they refused to accept it, but because they had known Lynette. Her entire identity was built around her children. The idea that she would leave them and then sustain a silence that lasted not months but decades was not the behavior of a woman who left. It was the silence of a woman who was gone. But grief is not evidence, and certainty is not a conviction. In 1983, he filed for divorce. In 1984, he married JC. Life moved forward. The missing person file stayed open. The family kept asking, and for a long time, nobody with power did enough about it. Then something changed. For certain people, time feels like protection. Each year that passes is another year of distance from the thing they did. Another year of witnesses fading, memories blurring, official urgency deflating. Another year in which the story they built becomes the accepted version simply because nothing has come forward to replace it. Chris Dawson had 36 years of that distance. 2 coronial inquests looked directly at Lynette's case. The first, in 2001, concluded she was almost certainly dead and had been murdered by someone she knew. The coroner recommended charges be laid. The director of public prosecutions reviewed the brief and declined. The second inquest in 2003 reached the same conclusion and made the same recommendation. Same result, no charges. For Lynette's family, those decisions were a particular kind of devastation. They had sat through the testimony. They had heard the coroner name what they had always believed. And then they had been told that the system, the same system that was supposed to protect people like Lynette, had decided the evidence wasn't enough. They went home and kept living with it. But they didn't stop asking. Then in 2018, something shifted the entire weight of the case. A journalist named Hedley Thomas, working with the Australian newspaper, released a podcast called The Teacher's Pet. It was not a sensationalist production designed to entertain. It was methodical, careful, investigative work that assembled, for the first time in one place, the full picture of what had surrounded Lynette's disappearance. The grooming, the relationship with JC, the stories that changed. The family's decades of unanswered questions. Millions of people listened. New witnesses came forward. People who had information they hadn't known where to send, or who hadn't been contacted in the original investigation, reached out. The New South Wales Police Commissioner made a public statement acknowledging that the original investigation had failed. A cold case strike force re-examined the evidence. In September 2018, police excavated the backyard of the Bayview property. They found no remains, but the case had already shifted. In December 2018, Chris Dawson was arrested on the Gold Coast. He was 70 years old. He was brought back to Sydney and charged with murder. He pleaded not guilty. The trial that followed was ordered to proceed before a judge alone, not a jury, because the podcast had reached so many people that the court determined a jury pool would be compromised by prior exposure. Justice Ian Harrison of the NSW Supreme Court would weigh the evidence himself. The prosecution had no body, no weapon, no forensic trace of a killing. What they had was a pattern, JC testified. She described what had been done to her as a student. She described the grooming, the sexual abuse, the deliberate construction of her role as Lynette's replacement. She described the conversations about removing Lynette, the alleged attempt to hire someone. The words that followed when that attempt didn't succeed. Lynette's family testified. They described who she was, the plans she made that last night, the silence that followed. A silence that in 40 years had never once been broken by a single verified sign that she was alive. And Chris Dawson maintained his version. She left. She called. She needed time. He had been saying it for 40 years. He said it again in the most consequential setting of his life. And that's where the story breaks. Because this time, the person weighing his words against everything else wasn't a confused investigator in 1982, or a department reviewing an old file, or a public figure managing limited resources. It was a judge in a courtroom with a complete brief, 40 years of accumulated evidence, and all the time he needed to think. August 30th, 2022. Justice Ian Harrison delivered his verdict. He spoke for approximately 5 hours. He worked through every piece of evidence methodically, addressed every argument the defense had made, and explained, clearly and in detail, why he found Chris Dawson guilty of the murder of Lynette Dawson beyond reasonable doubt. He found the claimed January 9th phone call to be a fabrication. He found the reported post-1982 sightings of Lynette to be vague, unreliable, and incapable of raising genuine doubt about her fate. He found that the speed with which JC had been installed in the family home, the deliberate construction of a replacement life within days of Lynette's disappearance, was not the behavior of an abandoned man. It was the behavior of a man who had known, before she disappeared, that she was not coming back. He concluded that Lynette Dawson had died on or around January 8th, 1982, as a direct result of a conscious, deliberate act by her husband. He described the motive as a possessive infatuation with JC and a calculated decision to avoid the complications of divorce while securing the life he had already decided he wanted. December 2nd, 2022. Chris Dawson was sentenced to 24 years in prison with a non-parole period of 18 years. He was 74 years old. His earliest possible parole date places him in his 90s. In 2024, the New South Wales Court of Criminal Appeal reviewed the case and dismissed his appeal. The conviction stands. The sentence stands. He is in prison. But here is what doesn't have a clean ending. Lynette's body has never been found. Her family has asked for her back publicly, repeatedly, with the quiet dignity of people who have been carrying this for longer than most people can imagine. Her daughters have asked the same. The one person who can answer that question has never answered it. And that absence, that final refusal to give them even that much, is perhaps the clearest statement Chris Dawson has ever made about how he sees the people his choices affected. But here is what the 40-year story ultimately tells us. Control is not the same as truth. You can manage a narrative for decades. You can use silence as a weapon. You can outlast investigations, outmaneuver early inquiries, survive 2 coronial inquests without being charged. You can build a new life on top of what you did and live inside it long enough to almost believe it yourself. But the people who love the person you wronged will keep asking. And the pattern of your own behavior, the rapid replacement, the delayed report, the shifting stories, the fabricated phone call, will eventually become a trail that points in one direction regardless of what you say. The case of Chris Dawson is not a story about a dramatic unmasking or a sudden revelation. There was no single moment where everything collapsed at once. It was slower than that, more methodical, a 40-year unraveling that happened one question at a time, until the questions accumulated into a weight that no story, however carefully maintained, could hold. Lynette called her mother on January 8, 1982, made plans, said goodnight. She didn't know those were her final hours. She didn't know that the life she was living had already been decided for her by someone she trusted. She deserved better than the 40 years of silence that followed. Her family deserved better than the decades of doubt they were forced to carry alone. And the story that was built to erase her, the one that cast her as a woman who simply walked away, has finally been answered with something she never got while she was alive. The truth, on the record, permanent. Sometimes that's the only justice there is, and sometimes that has to be enough.